right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all so much for joining us today. On behalf of AUVSI, I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, The Move from VOs to EOs in Enabling bvlos. So my name is Shannon Walker, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Strategic Programs here at AUVSI. And before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items that we always like to go over. So as always, all of the participant lines will remain muted throughout today's webinar. We are recording, and a viewing link will be emailed out to all attendees within the next week or so. And you can now view all of our webinars on AUVSI's new learning and engagement platform, Able. If you are listening to our webinar today and you need any assistance, please send a note to the webinar leader using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. After the presentation today, we are going to open up this session for Q&A. So attendees, you are welcome to and encouraged to submit those questions at any time throughout the presentation today using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The questions will be saved to be answered towards the end of the presentation. And it's important to note that this Q&A box is a different box than the chat. So please make sure that you submit any content questions for our speakers today using the Q&A button, which can be found right next to the chat button. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I would very much like to welcome and thank Kongsberg Geospatial for their generous support of today's webinar. And we are excited to have two excellent speakers here with us today. Thomas Jimenez, Market Director for UAS at Kongsberg Geospatial, and Cyril Cronenberg, the Vice President of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at UAVionics. So Thomas manages all aspects of enterprise UAS activity at Kongsberg Geospatial. So primarily managing IRIS terminal for bvlos operations, airspace management, and multi-domain situational awareness, Thomas has more than 1,000 hours of applied UAS flight experience in utilities inspection, oil and gas, mining, and photogrammetry in the US, Canada, and Latin America. So Thomas is also a manned single-engine aircraft private pilot, certified in both the USA and Canada. Our other presenter today is Cyril Cronenberg, and he's the VP of Strategic Partnerships and Business Development for UAVionics, where he heads up the strategic expansion of the rapidly growing offering of general aviation, UAS, and aviation network solutions. So with over 30 years of experience in the commercial aviation industry, Cyril has worked in numerous senior and executive aviation roles, which include, but aren't limited to, the International Air Transport Association, KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, Martinair, and the Royal Dutch Air Force. So Cyril holds licenses as an air traffic controller, is an active commercial pilot, a Part 107 remote pilot, and worked as a flight dispatcher. All of this providing him with unique firsthand experience of the operational requirements for a broad segment of the aviation industry. So, wow, guys, we have so much unique and really impressive experience and knowledge leading us today. So with that, Thomas, I am going to hand it over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shannon. Thanks a lot. Also, thank you, Cyril, for joining us today. I'm going to start off, for those who watched my last webinar, a couple of the first slides will be similar to the previous ones, just to run through some of the background of our company, and then shortly after we'll get into more of the specific subject. So for those who have already seen this before, please bear with me. So as Shannon mentioned, I'm the Market Director for UAS for Kongsberg Geospatial. Talking a little bit about the company, Kongsberg itself, we're actually, our parent company, Kongsberg, is headquartered in Norway, in the town of Kongsberg. It's one of the largest companies that a lot of people have never heard of. We're over 200 years old with more than 12,000 employees. And we work in a variety of different domains, marine, defense, aerospace, offshore. And we currently serve 39 different countries. The company is split into 4 different business divisions: Kongsberg Maritime, Defense and Aerospace, Digital, and Discovery. Our team at Kongsberg Geospatial are around the circled one of Kongsberg Defense and Aerospace. And our team specifically is headquartered in Ottawa, Canada. I myself, I'm based in Florida. I have some colleagues in Texas as well, but the lion's share of our team are in Canada, and in Ottawa specifically. The company's 30 years old, just over 30 years old. We employ just over 60 people. And our main focus is on situational awareness, geospatial visualization tools. And our products are also around the world. A quick history of our company. Originally, it was founded as a completely separate company as Gallium in 1992. In 2006, Kongsberg purchased Gallium. In 2012, it was rebranded. Gallium was rebranded to Kongsberg Geospatial. And in 2023 today, we still act as Kongsberg Geospatial. Here you can see a variety of the different projects that we've been involved in throughout these 3 decades. Obviously, some of them are UAS related, but a lot of them are not. And I'll explain a little more as to what our core products are. So the main backbone and the main tool or the lion's share of what we do is building these geospatial visualization technology systems, primarily for defense and some capacity in the enterprise space. So our backbone and our bread and butter and our core is TerraLens. It used to be called Intermafix, and it got rebranded to TerraLens. TerraLens is this super high performant SDK for mapping. So our clients buy this from us and then use it so as to develop the complex systems that they need to develop. So some of the places that you would see TerraLens are listed here, for example, the Navy Triton ground control system. More recently, in 2019, we delivered the remote ATC towers, remote traffic towers for Avinor in Norway. So TerraLens is embedded in both the heads-up and heads-down displays. But these are some of the many places that backbone SDK you find out in the real world. A quick touch on here, this is actually what the remote towers room looks like in Norway. It's very impressive, as you can see. And it highlights the fact that we are, at Kongsberg Geospatial, we're able to build to safety assurance standards as required by our clients. So then going down from TerraLens into Iris, as well as selling this SDK, we also build some software, some applications that use TerraLens as a backbone, and one of them is Iris. So Iris originates from the NASAMS fire control system, which in 2015 got improved and basically had a new fresh look, and it was updated. And in 2017 was the first time that we applied it to the UAS space. That's in its 1.0 version. Today we're in its 2.0 version. The easiest way to identify the difference is that it used to be in portrait, like here, and now we've gone over to landscape. So we can summarize or break down the Iris product family into 4 primary categories. Iris Terminal, which is what we'll talk about today, which is our situational awareness tool. Iris GCS, which is a custom GCS solution that we build for clients that is built on the backbone of Terminal. So it's like Terminal with more features on it. And we've got Iris Counter UAS, which we're going to see a lot more of into 2024. We're going to be pushing in that direction. And it's the same backbone as Terminal, but it's applied to the specifics of Counter UAS. Whether that's the flight logic, the defense logic, whatever it is that's required for counter UAS, it's not going to look identical to Terminal. And lastly, in the UTM space, on the sort of FAA NASA description of UTM, we're by no means a UTM, but we offer some services that a USS would offer inside the UTM space. But for the rest of today, we're going to talk about the Terminal side of things. Summarizing how Terminal works. We start with this static data, these terrain maps, DTED, in order to get our elevation data. We overlay periodic aeronautical data. We'll look into that in a second. Then we have the live data, so those live traffic feeds, tracks, everything that's that third-party airspace in and around our aircraft. Over that, we overlay our own aircraft, importantly, so we now have our own ship with regards to all of its space around it. And then we run a series of services such as collision avoidance, and I'll touch on some of those in a little while. And those sort of make the full spread of Iris Terminal. Here's a quick visualization, because in the past people have said that they'd like to see a little more of it. It's a quick screen grab. I'd invite anyone if they'd like to see it live. I'd love to schedule a meeting and I'll show you a live version of it. This is a bit of what the UI can look like. It's super adaptable and customizable. If this were live, I could drag and drop and move things and space them. But in the bottom right corner, we have our 2D display. Top left corner, we have the same visualization in 3D. Up left here, we've got our live telemetry from the aircraft. Bottom left, we have our live tracks. So we've got all our track list there, our own and third-party tracks. And then in top right, we've got a live feed from one of our aircraft. How Iris Terminal works, it's all built on this backbone of this publish subscribe DDS model. We draw in our own ship telemetry into it. Then we also draw in a number of different sensors or feeds, such as radar, ADS-B through solutions such as UAvionics' ping station, for example. We also work with feeds such as UAvionics' Flightline or True Sky Flightline. Those all feed into the DDS. And then also we have those services that I discussed before that are running in the background. And then those are the visualization. The screen itself is one portion of it we see in the bottom right here. But there's a lot more happening than just that visualization screen in the background. And lastly, we have an Iris web viewer where when clients want to be able to push it out to the field, where they might have teams with, for example, LTE-enabled tablets, they can push that data out to people in remote environments. So that covers a bit of what I've covered in the past and previous ones. And now we want to just go into a little more of electronic observers. We're starting to hear that name a lot more. What electronic observers really are, and how we're going to probably start seeing some of these this into more of the complex bvlos operations that come up, and how, for example, well clear boundaries and so on work in there. I'm going to start with where I left off with the last webinar, which is just looking at a very basic instance of a linear inspection. So this is what, for example, I did a lot of transmission inspection, and a traditional transmission inspection would look like this. There was probably two of us in a pickup truck, and here's our drone on the top left. And the principle of it is that we can work visual line of sight. As such, either the pilot or visual observer needs to be able to see the drone and also deconflict the airspace. So keep an eye for the surrounding airspace to make sure that there are no potential conflicts. The downside to limiting it to visual line of sight is that we have to have a lot of takeoff locations. In order to keep it within a small 1.6, for example, kilometer inspection leg, there's a lot of moving that truck. So as we go into beyond visual line of sight, it's by no means, I mean, there's by all means beyond visual line of sight waivers approved that don't require a DAA or EOs. For example, there's a lot of widely used ones now with masking or shielding. But as we go towards more complex ones, that I in the previous slide is going to be replaced with what I've put here as a satellite dish. But ultimately, our electronic observer is going to be using these tools in order to get more distance out of it. It will be able to monitor the airspace further afield than what the eye could do in the past. And as an example here, just for the sake of visualizing it, we talk about a 4 kilometer inspection leg. What do we do by that? We ultimately are reducing our cost per asset. If we don't have to relocate that truck every 1.6 kilometers and we can stretch it to 4, our cost per asset goes down and we become more efficient. So summarizing that, part 107 was very heavy on visual line of sight. We used visual observers to deconflict that airspace. A lot of the process up until now under part 107 involved waiving that visual line of sight as a series of guidelines and parameters inside that waiver application, and then the FAA would waive that. And as we move towards part 108, which is being discussed a lot at the moment, which is also being called the beyond visual line of sight rule by some people, we're probably going to see a lot more of electronic observers replacing visual observers. I don't think it'll be by all means always. There will still be a lot of other cases, but once we get into complex missions, we're going to see a lot more of that. So breaking it down and starting with what are EOs or what is an electronic observer. And this is a text straight from the FAA. I'll quickly read it. The FAA, however, uses the term electronic observer to describe people who monitor the UA and surrounding airspace activity through electronic means rather than directly with their own eyes, and uses the term visual observer to describe people who observe the UA and surrounding airspace directly with their own eyes. So unpacking that a little, and this may seem obvious, but I think it makes sense to unpack it. EOs are people. EOs aren't a sensor. EOs aren't screens. EOs are a human who in the past would be deconflicting airspace with their own eyes. And now they still have the responsibility to monitor the drone. They still have the responsibility to monitor the airspace and deconflict it. They have the responsibility along with the RPIC to monitor aspects such as weather as well. And now in order for all that to happen, there's supporting elements. So we think before where the person used their eyes directly, now there's a lot more complexity. So to make it very simple looking, our previous scene where we had someone inspecting transmission lines, now we have a number of sensors or feeds, for example, like we're going to hear from Cyril at UAvionics, sensors such as ping stations, radars. We work a lot with the team at Echodyne, for example, EOIR cameras, any number of sensors that are built into that ConOps that we've provided to the FAA as proof that we're deconflicting the airspace. And then we have the electronic observer, the person who in the past would look with their eyes at the drone, but now we're having to bridge this gap. So obviously there's some form of network that might be on a LAN basis, if it's a team that's working out of say a Sprinter van with sensors on their vehicle, or if it's a more complex operation, these EOs might be located elsewhere. At the moment, it's all based locally, but eventually those EOs will be elsewhere. And then we have the common operating picture, that visualization tool, pardon me, which in this case, it's Iris Terminal. This is the product that we sell. So that common operating picture overlays all of these sensors, which if every sensor provided one screen, we're actually not doing the job of making the process more simple. We're making it more complex. So we have these sensors, these feed through a network that go to one common operating picture where we see all of our traffic, our ownership, cooperative ADS-B traffic, non-cooperative traffic, and that feeds the electronic observer. And lastly, I'll add one more thing here, which is going to be a very important part as well of these processes and these exemptions as we move forward into Part 108. The ConOps describes a whole bunch of technology here, but this is almost like a chain, and it's only as good as its weakest link. If any one of these sensors isn't working, we're going to need to be able to see that. So if our ConOps talks of a radar, we need to know that that radar is running. So that health monitoring is going to be a very key part to it as well. We work with various companies, but notably with Resilience on that. They've got a great team who are doing this day in, day out. So what do we gain with electronic observers? And now we basically start to open the door towards beyond visual line of sight at scale. We can start working with sort of complex aviation environments and complex terrain, for example. We can start going further afield. We have clients in oil and gas who want to they need to start pushing sort of the 30 to 40 kilometer windows. So we need to try and bring these systems in place so that they can do that and make this cost affordable. We're also bringing in ground risk class and air risk class, which is something that we see a lot more in Europe. And we can bring that in by visualizing it on that same common operating picture as they're seeing their traffic. We're going to discuss well-clear logic as well. We bring that in as well digitally, and ultimately, not quite yet, but eventually it's going to be able to enable remote operating centers where people can monitor and become EOs from a distance without having to always have your EO on site. That isn't something today, but I think we will get there. This slide, we always have this slide, so I want to show it because it does really speak to what we're talking about. If every one of our sensors has one screen, for one, we're providing too much. There's too much for an airspace manager to look at, but also there's very little relative awareness. If I've got one screen which is showing me my aircraft location, another one showing me my ADS-B tracks, and another one showing me my radar, I have no idea if they're centered on the same location, if they're at the same scale. So that one pane of glass is what's key, feeding all sorts of different feeds in, and completely platform agnostic, drone agnostic, sensor agnostic, we can see all those tracks in the same pane of glass. I'll speed it up a little because I realize it's 20 past the hour now. So our Iris terminal isn't just that one common operating picture. It also has supporting services. So it would be all well and good to see all this traffic on a screen, but we need to be able to make sense of it and see what a real risk is. So we have a number of different supporting services that help the operator and help the airspace manager, like well-clear boundaries, dynamic airspaces, ground risk overlays, and I'm going to quickly touch on some of these. Our well-clear boundary, which people often describe as this floating hockey puck around our own ship, here we can see that in red, but it's more than just sort of a pretty visual tool which gives us some awareness of distance. This well-clear boundary hockey puck is also what our algorithm, our conflict avoidance algorithm, uses to calculate a risk. So here we have an example around our hockey puck. Here we see a Cessna 172. Based on their trajectory, there's a risk of, there's a countdown timer, which if this were live, you'd see it's at 46 seconds, and it'll count down. It gives us our horizontal separation, our vertical separation, and it counts down to when we risk our breach of well clear from our own aircraft. So that's applying and putting that well clear boundary to good use. Dynamic airspaces. So we work with our team, with the team at Aloft. We ingest all of the dynamic airspaces from LANC. So here we see, for example, the Empower field in Denver, the American football field, and then the airspace closures that take place there, or DoD closures. So that means that not only when people are planning flights, but also once flights are executing, if a new airspace opens up, or if something opens up during that flight execution, we're monitoring that air risk. And it's refreshing relatively frequently at 15 seconds. Sorry, at 15 minutes. And population densities, this is something that we're starting to work with more now. At this stage, what we do is we overlay population densities, because what we're going to see more of as a ground risk class is missions or exemptions that will be based on overflying up to a given population count. So we can say, for example, if our missions, we're only exempted, or we're only allowed to fly populations up until, say, 50 people, this overlaying this is very helpful. And the next iteration of this, it'll be smart. So it'll allow us to, when the aircraft is flying, it'll warn us if we're overflying beyond what the ConOps allows us to do. And lastly, terrain warning. I'll quickly touch on this. It's a little video, sorry. Our terrain warning, when operators are working in mountainous terrains, again, we might be operating quite far away from our aircraft. This support tool, we put the parameters that we would like for safety, and it provides us with this added layer of safety that we're not going to get too close to physical terrain, or it will alert us if we get too close to whatever we set as physical terrain parameters. So all of these are supporting tools so as to help the operator who's working quite far away from their aircraft in making the right decisions as an electronic observer at this point. So I'll summarize that quickly and hand over. To me, electronic observers, this is the next stage. We're going to hear more of electronic observers, I have no doubt. It's the next evolution. Visual observers were where we went to. Part 107 made exemptions in there. But as we start going towards complex missions, Part 108, I think that EOs are here to stay. And it's a matter of making that as easy as possible for them. I think, and we'll talk about this in the next webinar in a month's time, layering of sensors is important. A lot of sensors are important because they pick up different traffic that is important. But if every sensor means an additional screen, we're not increasing awareness. So by having everything work on one panel, that's fundamental. And lastly, there's no need. Electronic observers, basically, they just need to be able to deconflict it. But if we can provide them with supporting algorithms and supporting services, then that really helps them in discerning real risks, like terrain risks or like other aircraft risks. So it just makes that EO's job that little bit easier. And with that, and I think I've gone a little over, sorry about this, a quick congratulations. I think that Cyril's going to talk about this, but on the recent news between UAVionics and Iris Automation. And I'll hand over to Cyril who's the VP of Business Development. And sorry about getting over.
I'll just cut my my deck in half, Thomas. Let me see. I'll just need my screen sharing privileges, and I'll pull my my screen up here. There we go. Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining in, and thanks Thomas for that overview. A lot of it sounds very familiar if you're a pilot or an air traffic controller. So we see this industry definitely moving forward in a certain direction. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the role of an EO, but also what goes into making that role possible. And Uvionics as an operator is one of the holders of multiple waivers, as well as an exemption that was announced by the FAA at the Commercial UAV Expo in Las Vegas. And the EO is a very fundamental piece of that strategy for us. A little bit about us as a background. I mean, we are really around connecting aviation. For those of you that don't know, our heritage is originally in model aircraft. Our founder, Paul Beard, was very heavily in model aviation. And a lot of the technology that stemmed from there went into general aviation, where we learned how to certify things to the standards of the FAA and the standards of EASA. And from that, we took both of those experiences and really focused on how do we miniaturize what we have done in the past on model aircraft, and now leverage that certification experience into the uncrewed world. So that's a lot of what we're doing, but we've increasingly also started moving into the systems and networks because we see that our customers are asking for it. And obviously there is a need for some consistency in the application of technologies that we're building. A little on the drone industry in general. These are my observations. I wasn't a drone pilot, probably as many of you on the call until a couple of years ago. I came from the crew aviation business, and a lot of what I saw when I came was an industry that was still very much, I would call it, in the sandbox. A lot of operators doing things not necessarily with a lot of regulatory oversight, a lot of builds going on, a lot of test sites, a lot of cordoned off pieces of airspace, a lot of closed off airspace. And the program around Part 107 was really the first change to that original sandbox environment. But the sandbox really didn't go away. Part 107, in my view, is still very much a sandbox environment because you still have to meet a lot of the same requirements that crew aviation needs to meet. And a lot of what we're doing in this industry is really based on that heritage of crewed aviation. We've seen our first type certificates. Our own aircraft is going through a SEC-EC as we speak. I've seen other aircraft go through SEC-EC processes. We're seeing very large drones fly at the size of 777s or 737s. In the military world, we've seen anything far and beyond. So we know that it's possible to do it with larger aircraft. We know the technology is there to make a Cessna Grand Caravan fly operationally, but it is really hinging on how do you get to beyond visual line of sight. A lot of the constraint around the use of that type of technology, barring the military world where different rules apply, is really hinging on what currently is a waiver process. Exemptions were the first slight change to that process on the FAA side. Exemptions under the FAA's reading of it are more rulemaking than anything else, because an exemption is what it says. It's an exemption to an existing rule, which means that others can point to an exemption and apply that same logic to their own request for an exemption. And the FAA will very clearly describe what logic is being used in an exemption. Wrong button. So I go back to that sandbox. I've seen the drone world develop in nicer drones, much better capabilities. Folks are flying. We've seen tremendous amounts of money being spent in the industry, but we're still at this fundamental crossroads where every operation we're dragging more and more gear towards the operation, and we still got that guy that is looking at the sky at most of our operations. Now we've cracked that nut with some operations, and beyond visual line of sight is more common than it ever was, but we're still not done with that second person there. In fact, it's kind of strange if you look at how many people are involved to make one drone fly versus tomorrow I can take my Cirrus here off the airport and go fly, and I can go anywhere in the country, and it's just me and my two eyes. And I don't even have to talk to air traffic control to do that. None of the questions that are being asked in the drone industry are actually being asked of me as a pilot, other than do I have my flying license and is the aircraft certified? So it's a fundamentally different approach, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. So the problem with visual observers, and Thomas hinted at that already, they're expensive. And I shamelessly borrowed this slide from our friends at IRIS. But they're expensive. They cost. You have to have that person available. You need to train them. You have to establish procedures. Do they really want to do that role? I've been a VO myself many times in North Dakota in the winter when our flight team was out there operating, and I was jealous of our flight team sitting in the van with the heater on when you're standing there in your boots in the snow trying to find a drone against a white background and hoping that you're not going to see an aircraft at the same time. It's not a very good way of dealing with drones by any means. But it's not a very unique thing to unmanned aviation. For those of you in the crewed world or in the manned world, this gentleman sitting here is Archie Leake. He was actually the first air traffic controller the U.S. ever had. And I think the airport is St. Louis, where he worked at the time. But he literally went out every day with his chair, with his umbrella, with his little wheelbarrow with food and drinks in it. And he was the first VO this industry ever had. He sat there every day watching planes, using his eyes, yelling out instructions when people needed instructions, and making sure that folks would be warned of somebody else behind them or in front of them. So the VO role is definitely not new, and ATM has evolved a tremendous amount from the days of Archie Leake. When you go to a tower, or what Thomas was sharing earlier, even the digital towers that we're seeing right now. So take one step back. For us as an operator, we obtained our first beyond visual line of sight waiver up in North Dakota. We are not an operator that is intending to do anything commercial with our operations. We are an operator by the sheer need of having to have a test truck testing our radios in the field. So we became an operator. We have multiple aircraft. We have an excellent flight crew. And they went out and they got the first waiver for Uvionics. The difference was this waiver was not just based on our ping station or on a ground radio that we had mounted on the truck, but this first waiver was actually based on detect and avoid and C2 as a network. It was based on the Vantis architecture, where the detect and avoid infrastructure was installed permanently and flew through. Well, the data was actually flowing through another party, Thales, who was part of the Vantis team, to the remote piloting command. So here you had a unique situation where under that waiver, we neither owned the C2 equipment, nor did we own the DAA equipment, even though it was our own equipment. But technically, we were taking that information from Vantis. And Vantis was providing detect and avoid and C2 as a service. Since then, we've made multiple other waiver requests, some on behalf of our customers, and we've replicated that same process elsewhere in the country. One of the sites that we're very actively involved in doing this is in Choctaw, where our friends at Choctaw Nation are operating under that same waiver and that same type of structure, where now our C2 and DAA radios that we installed for them are part of the C2 and DAA infrastructure as a service. So what we did in that waiver is effectively take that guy standing out in the cold in his boots back into the truck and put him right next to our remote piloting command. So during any of our beyond visual line of sight flights, the gentleman on the left, who is our director of flight operations, Drew, long military background, a great procedural operational thinker. He just goes outside to verify that nobody gets hit when the drone takes off. But that's the last time you'll see him outside. Him and Kevin, our remote piloting command there, are flying that drone entirely out of the trailer. There is nobody outside during the entire flight. And we've flown this for up to 100 miles. We've flown a lot of duration of flights this way. And what you see on the screens there is on the right, it's very segmented. On the right, the RPIC is really looking at the ground control station and anything that he needs to know for operating the drone. On the left, it is situational awareness. Drew is now our EO in this situation, so he has the same responsibilities as a VO would have, but he is doing that through the means of electronic tools. He communicates to our RPIC the same way a VO would. We're giving him traffic instructions. We're noticing what comes up on the flight, and that data on that screen might be carrying our own receivers. It might be radar data. It might be combined. There's all kinds of way of going about that. But the process and the procedures have not really changed between an EO and a VO. And even though they're here in the same truck, they really don't physically need to be in the same truck as long as they have a means of communicating to each other. So I'll take a little sidestep here, because that whole EO process and obtaining information electronically from aircraft would be extremely effective. In fact, it would be the only thing that is necessary to grow unmanned aviation if there was such a thing as electronic conspicuity. And you'll hear this term in the next months, years, coming more and more into the US. But the world is slowly changing into understanding that there is really only one way to truly integrate the two technologies in our sky, and that is through digital conspicuity. You have to have a way to make the drone, the manned aircraft, the large drone, and the ground systems talk to each other. And we've gone about all over the place with what that technology should look like, but we are seeing an increased use of some of the standards that come from our aviation environment, such as ADS-B. We're seeing more countries starting to look at UAT, 978 megahertz, which is very commonly used for manned aircraft here in the US. Most of us don't even know we're on it, but we've got probably 100,000 aircraft out that are transmitting on 978. And more commonly, we're also seeing countries adopt the idea of having portable, low-power ADS-B devices. Countries like Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, it is very common for somebody to go fly in an airplane and bring a little cigarette pack size transponder they stick on the window, which makes them visible for anybody with a receiver for ADS-B. The standards are there. It's already embedded in aviation, avionics throughout the world, and it's pretty much the same wherever you are in the world. The ConOps that we increasingly see is where there is a requirement for commercial aircraft and mandate aircraft to transmit ADS-B. There is a requirement for drones to be able to receive ADS-B, and increasingly a requirement for those that don't fall under a mandate to transmit something else than standard ADS-B. Low power ADS-B, call it what you want to call it, but it is based on the same technology. So I'll focus on that ADS-B piece for now, because what we saw happening in the industry was a lot of people, and Thomas, thanks for being one of those people, buying our ping stations as a means to receive that collaborative traffic. There's a lot of ways of doing that. You can go on flightaware.com or flightradar24.com and put a screen in front of you, and you'll see ADS-B traffic. But to do that in a way that gives you that safety assurance that Thomas was talking about, and making sure that you can actually trust that data, is a whole different ballgame. The ping station has been used widely. We started to see our sales uptick very quickly, and it very quickly became one of our most sold products. But we started thinking to ourselves, well, what would a world look like in a scaled UAS environment where everybody would bring their own ping station? It'd be great for us as a business. We'd be selling lots of ping stations, but is that really the way to go? The other piece that came in was through the waiver processes of a lot of our customers, the same question was being asked by regulators, and not just by the FAA, but a lot of regulators around the world were asking the same question. How do you know that sensor works? How do you know that what the aircraft says it is doing is actually happening? How do you know that data isn't being spoofed? So what we came up with is the concept of, well, why wouldn't we connect a lot of these sensors that are out in the field and do that type of validation and monitoring of that system on behalf of our customers? We tried it out with a few of our customers, and it was received very well. And we created something which we now call True Sky, but it is nothing different than what in the manned aircraft world is called multilateration. But it is a means to validate whether the single sensor data you get from ADS-B is actually truthful. If you receive that message on multiple sensors, you can start to say that based on time distance of arrival, that aircraft is actually where it says it is, and you can rule out a lot of errors in that message. We started rolling out our own alternative for the ping station, which we call the flight station. I didn't want to deviate too much from the station. And that is effectively a ping station, but it is a little bit more of a robust build based on ATC standards. We were going for something that in the manned aviation world would be certifiable, but we are not selling it. We started rolling these out with partners. We started rolling these out with operational customers. And the whole principle was effectively a federated network of ADS-B receivers, where anybody that brought one of these receivers to their operation would contribute to the network. And slowly we would be building our own network of ADS-B data. Here you can see a bit of an overlay over Virginia. We've pretty much got down to 500 feet in most places around airports down to the ground. Data from the entire state, but also up in Maryland, down in North Carolina. So it started getting expanded very quickly. We have similar rollouts throughout the US, and currently I would say probably 3/4 of the US we have covered, mostly through our customers, but also thanks to a partnership that we signed with Civil Air Patrol, part of the US Air Force, who use these sensors to lower the coverage for search and rescue below the FAA radar feeds. So we now had a data source, we had networks of data, and now the question is, well, how do we tell the FAA what this data does and how good it is? And we're running into another area of unclarity, and this will hopefully start crystallizing over the next months or so. But it is really not quite clear for any single operator what the requirement is for DAA. There's a lot of standards, and we have a lot of aviation standards, TSOs. We've got an ADS-B standard. We've got ASTM, RTCA, but the FAA is not necessarily saying, well, if you do this, then I will approve you. They leave that very much up to industry. But there are a lot of things that are called out that we see replicated in all of our customers' approvals that start making the picture complete for us. One of the things is design assurance, software assurance, and software design assurance, and hardware design assurance. Thomas called it safety assurance. It is about how do you ensure that the risk of something going down is as minimal as possible, which means you need to be able to do health and status monitoring. You need to have integrity monitoring on your GPS. You need to be able to measure your performance, what latency are you running at, and you have to be able to, with a high level of confidence, say, what is the service volume that I'm covering, and be able to stand behind that declaration when you need it. There's a lot of standards throughout the different documents, but we're starting to slowly see that move into this area. So This is a bit of an overview of the why, and here you can see this is the Choctaw area. In red, you see the FAA low altitude, and we're talking really low altitude, 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet coverage from DFW, and on a top left it's Tulsa. And then in between, you can see that effectively the FAA at low altitude really starts running into line of sight restrictions from their main infrastructure. So in between, we started filling that in with flight stations, and in the combination of the two, we were able to pick up actually nearly 100% of the traffic that is cooperative. So we're still talking cooperative traffic here. So we talked about the exemption earlier. There is a piece in the exemption that's pretty important, which is you need to be able to now also control that aircraft and use that C2 link to control the aircraft. So we effectively have two components now that we've used in all of our waivers and that are part of the exemption. One is what we call flight line. So that is the, let's call it federated DAA data that is coming from our cooperative receivers. And then we have our Skyline, which is a networked C2 capability where you can also meet a lot of these requirements that the regulator sets on performance, and you're able to actually document those requirements. So the two of them combined now allow you to go in quite a lot of depth to document the requirements that are often looked for by regulators. So Thomas mentioned it earlier, but we recently acquired Iris Automation, a great group of guys. So now we're bringing in the non-cooperative piece. For those of you that don't know what Iris Automation does, there's various elements in there, but the two main areas are around airborne and ground optical surveillance. So again, we're just expanding the aperture of the type of information that you can feed back and that you can network. There's no reason why any of these units, when they're on the ground, for instance, should be used by a single operator. You could be sharing that data, and you could be sharing the information from that data and feeding it into a front end, such as Iris Terminal, which is already happening with Cassia anyway. But the philosophy here is that we're bringing in new technologies to create a single operational picture for both cooperative and non-cooperative. We've ingested various types of radars. We've worked very closely with Detect Radar down at the Choctaw Range. So a more enhanced picture can be created, and we're not in the software business for visualizing that. So bear with me that the quality of this graphics is not as good as the one that Thomas showed. But what we do here is feed all that data through an API to a front end that can actually deal with that data and build the tools around that data that can be used by the operator, which is where Iris then comes in. So now we're able to feed a consolidated set of real-time positional awareness information, whether they come from optical, whether they come from ADS-B, or whether they come from a radar, but do that in a way that is entirely traceable against aviation standards, to make it easier for a regulator to actually approve that entire system end to end for the use of detect and avoid by an electronic observer. Ultimately, where are we going with the EO? And I'll deviate there maybe a little bit from where Thomas left it off, because I personally could ask myself the question: does an EO still need to be a human? But for now, I think we have an EO as a human. I think we'll start seeing a single EO to multiple remote pilots. You already see that type of operation happen in Africa and a big part of Latin America with large scale operations. But ultimately, you could even start looking at things like, is the EO necessarily part of the same team as the remote pilot, or could you apply for EO services? Does the EO data necessarily need to feed a human EO, or could it feed autonomy? Could you feed instructions to an aircraft, or could you start feeding ACARS type of systems on the ground or in the air? It will ultimately go more to managing an airspace, just like air traffic control has, than controlling a specific flight. And that's ultimately where ATC and the crewed aircraft and the crewed world has gone. And we see that the unmanned industry will slowly go in that direction as well. So that was my piece here, and I'll hand it back to Shannon.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. As a reminder, audience, we're taking questions. We've got several coming in already. So if you'd like to get yours in the queue, make sure that you submit it using that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. First question geared towards Thomas is Iris Terminal drone agnostic, and how does it visualize the ownership location and telemetry?
Yes, it's entirely drone agnostic. So what we do is we work with our clients on understanding their use case, understanding their choice of airframe. And in many cases, it's not one airframe. Like most of the complex clients are working on various airframes that have fixed wings, eVTOL, so on. So yeah, we work based on normally at parts from their autopilot, understanding what autopilot they're using, and then we draw telemetry from that autopilot back to Iris Terminal. But there's also alternatives, like we work a lot with the team at Elsight with their Halo, and also through the Skyline platform. So all of those are ways that we can pull in that telemetry so as to visualize it on the terminal.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question that we have coming in says, what is the purpose of adding an additional person if a manned pilot can monitor airspace and the aircraft at the same time?
What do you say to that one, sir? Well, I mean, for me, I'm as a manned pilot, I'm just a VFR manned pilot with our Cessna. So I'm both the eyes and I'm in the cockpit. The key part there, when it's the deconfliction of the airspace. In my VFR scenario in my Cessna, I'm deconflicting the airspace with my eyes. But I know that Cyril might have a different approach and also has a lot more manned hours than I do.
Well, I mean, I'm not really sure in what context the question is asked, but if the question is a personal one to should we have a separate EO from a remote piloting command, then my personal answer would be I don't think we need to, because if you've got a consolidated view to operate a flight and most of it is automated to a certain level, then you could easily integrate that role of a VO into ARPIC. I don't see why you could not do that. To the point of we do that in manned aviation. There's no requirement of somebody sitting next to me when I fly to look out the window. But that's all, unfortunately, that's not how it currently works, and I'm not sure the regulator would agree with my opinion. Yeah, I see no technical reason why you would need a separate EO from a remote piloting command.
Right, perfect. Thank you. Can either of you talk towards does the bvlos waiver require filing a flight plan, and does it require an emergency or flight diversion plan?
Our waivers, and I can only speak to our waivers, but our waivers do not require a flight plan filed. Sometimes it requires a NOTAM to be issued in the nearby airspace. For instance, in Choctaw, typically a NOTAM is issued by Dallas Fort Worth that indicates that drone activity will take place. But we are not filing flight plans for individual flights when we fly. Just like it is on crewed aviation, we're flying and we're satisfying the Part 91 requirement of looking out of our own aircraft by introducing the EO in that mix.
Yeah, I agree. Anyone that I've been involved in the US and in Canada under an SFOC, I've never had the requirement to file a flight plan.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question came in, it's related to weather. So it said, exemptions tend to require VO or GCS to observe weather that can adversely impact UA. Any thoughts on the source of the weather for the EOs?
So we, at the moment, we basically pull in, we have a number of different weather feeds that we pull in as standard inside Iris Terminal, but we also work with clients to work with their custom weather sources. In the past, we've worked closely with the True Weather team. So they work on a more sort of focused, hyper-localized weather, and I think Meteomatics as well. But we, much like the fact that we're agnostic to sensors and to drones, we also work with our clients. We have our standard weather sources, which aren't the best, but normally clients will want to work with a more focused weather source, and we can adapt to that.
Perfect. Thank you. Questions are rolling in. Okay, next one. What's the UAVionics ground radar, ground DAA detecting range in Choctaw?
I wish I could say we make a ground radar, but we don't. So that's very, very specific to whatever ground radar that is. I think the range can be anywhere from 2 nautical miles to 10, 20 nautical miles. I mean, an air traffic surveillance radar, if you want to spend $50 million, then you can get probably 50 to 60 miles out of it. So it's very much dependent on the type of radar and how it's angled, where it's positioned, etc. I think in Choctaw we pretty much have a linear 20-mile area that we can fly beyond visual line of sight, and it's covered to, if I recollect correctly, by 2 radars for that airspace.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so what occurs in the case of an incursion by a non-cooperative aircraft?
Yeah, I mean, so that differs. It depends very much on who the operator is. I think that is part of where we're going through as an industry. So I can talk to what we do. We have our flight operations team as a flight operations manual, which pretty much calls out 2 very specific things, which is what do you do in a case of a lost link, and what do you do in case of an aircraft. In the case of an aircraft, typically our VO calls out sectorized information to the RPIC on where that aircraft is in relation to the drone. And what we typically do is lower the drone to be no conflict for that aircraft. But again, that could be different for somebody with their own ConOps. The FAA doesn't really prescribe a means of action as long as you stay well clear.
Yeah, and in terms of what Iris Terminal doesn't make any suggestions, what it does, it alerts you to that. So rather than having to supervise that airspace, the algorithm is working based on that well clear boundary, and it will alert if there's a trajectory of a non-cooperative aircraft that risks threatening our well clear boundary. And then it goes down, it scales down to the ConOps as to what, based on the airframe, based on what's described in the ConOps, what the process is afterwards. So we don't get involved in that.
Okay, perfect. So this might be along the same lines, but instead of a non-cooperative aircraft, a question came in about how does it navigate like large flocks of geese or other large flocks, which may diverge into many aspects at any given minute, like 5 to 10,000, that whole range. Has any testing been done, or what would happen in that situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, again, that's I would call that non-cooperative traffic. Not any different than I would not want to encounter those with my aircraft. If there's an optical system, it would recognize that. So, for instance, an Iris system would detect that threat and would warn the pilot as if it was an aircraft, and would give information about that. So with a primary radar, if it's properly tuned, it would pick up a large flock of geese as an object. But a single bird, it gets very hard to detect from any means on the ground, and that's just a risk that I think we'll just encounter. Not unlike bird collisions are still common in manned aviation.
Yeah, in my experience, some of the radar manufacturers we've been working with, they're improving their classification algorithms, so we can start to get a slightly better picture of probability or percentage of likelihood of a given, maybe it's 4 categories, manned aircraft, drone, bird, so on. But I think when we're talking I think the question was for in the thousands of birds. I'm not sure how it would perform there.
All right,
That's
perfect.
basically
Well, yeah, I am looking at the time and we are pushing right up to the top of the hour. So I'm going to end with this last question and then leave it to either of you for any closing comments or thoughts before we wrap for the day. So final question is Iris Terminal a web-based solution or on-prem?
So Iris Terminal is on-prem. It's installed on local computers, and then depending on the architecture, the nature of the install of the client, it can be as simple as in a laptop in the back of say a Sprinter van connected to the LAN with the sensors, or we can, in some cases, it sits on a rack on one of the servers, and then it's feeding a number of different terminals. So the services are running in the rack in the background, and then it's feeding a number of different visualization terminals. But one way or another, it is an on-prem solution. The only exception to that is that web viewer portion, which is web-based, but it's an on-prem solution. It's a big client.
Perfect. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so unfortunately we're not getting to all of the questions, but if your question was submitted but not answered, we will be providing them to our speakers for follow-up afterwards. So let me give a moment for Thomas or Cyril. Do you have any closing thoughts before I wrap it up?
I'll just start. But thank you to Shannon and to AUVSI putting on. Thank you to Cyril for joining us. And it's very enjoyable. And I really am glad that we get to work so closely with professionals like you, Avionics. It's a relationship that we've been growing, and now with Flightline, with True Sky, and with Skyline, it's just going to keep growing. And we obviously only had an hour here. Anyone wants to reach out to me, just find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to show you the real live version, which is a lot better than a bunch of slides.
Yes, I'm here, and thanks for inviting me, Thomas. Yeah, happy to answer any more questions, and people want to reach out. I'm sure the information will be shared with from this call.
Perfect. Well, on behalf of AUVSI, thank you, Thomas and Cyril, for this excellent presentation, this great discussion today, and to Kongsberg Geospatial for their support of this webinar. So attendees, you will receive a link to access today's webinar recording within the next week or so. Another exciting feature is all of our webinars are available on AUVSI's learning and engagement platform, AVOL. So when you go in to view the recording, be sure to look around at all of the features that it has to offer. So if you have any additional questions or comments for our team, please feel free to reach out to us at education@auvsi.org. And lastly, today's program is copyrighted by AUVSI with all rights reserved. So once again, thank you all for being with us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.